talk about all sorts of things we align on, like jobs and economic growth, opportunities for the middle class, the fact that millions of good jobs on both sides of our border depend on the smooth flow of goods and services across that border. But we're also going to, I'm sure, talk about things where we disagree on, and we'll do it in a respectful way.
There is the Prime Minister in his own words. It's time for the Sunday Scrum with their take on Trudeau's visit. Joining me from Ottawa today, freelance columnist Susan Riley. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Carol. John
Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail. Hi, John.
Hey, Carol.
And a big welcome to radio host and political columnist Rob Breckenridge from News Talk 770. Rob joins us from Calgary today. Welcome to the Sunday Scrum, Rob.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let me begin with you. How should Trudeau play this, tough or tame?
Well, I think he's got to try to find the balance in between. I think there's a domestic political audience that expects him to differentiate himself from Trump and not be afraid to challenge the U.S. president. You've heard people urging him to reverse his position on Keystone or urging him to withdraw the Safe Third Country Agreement. So I think there's an expectation that at home he shows that he's different than Donald Trump, but not do so in a way to needlessly poke the bear. And he's going to have to go there and show that the two can get along and that the relationship is strong. And at the same time, I mean, he's going to face some tough questions. At some point, somebody is going to ask him about Trump's travel ban and what's he going to say. I think he's got to give an answer that's going to play well at home, but also at the same time not alienate the U.S. president. So he's got a tricky line to walk.
Yeah, and especially since the American media has already been on this story. Washington Post saying a couple of days ago, Trudeau has begun to position himself as a competing voice to Trump on the world stage, delivering indirect but unmistakable criticisms of the new U.S. president's policies. John, how do you think he should play this meeting?
Well, first of all, he should ignore the Washington Post. The Americans are really torquing this. Trudeau has, I think, been pitch perfect on this. Look, we all agree, left or right, conservative or liberal, whatever you are, almost all Canadians agree that Donald Trump is a menace. He's a menace to global security, he's a menace to his own country, and he's a menace to the Canadian economy. And Justin Trudeau has done a great job thus far of looking for places where he can agree, toning down or tamping down areas of obvious disagreement, trying to keep the relationship open. But the Americans, especially the American press, especially the mainstream media, are looking for an anti-Trump. One is hard to find in the United States right now, so they seem to have latched on to Justin Trudeau as the great crusader who represents everything that Donald Trump is not. This is not in our interest, and they should just stop.
Susan, what do you think?
You asked Katie Simpson what will Trump be looking for from this meeting, and my answer is love. I think he's got a bottomless need for approval and applause, and I think one of Justin Trudeau's strengths is that he's able to display empathy. In past meetings between presidents and prime ministers, people always focus on the personal chemistry. I've always kind of poo-pooed that. I think that the relationship, it's really a business relationship between Canada and the U.S., and it's generally left in the hands of bureaucrats and lower-level officials. In this case, I make an exception. Trump is such a mercurial character. He's so keyed into personality and relationships. Look at the way he sort of took the Japanese prime minister under his wing and took him off golfing and really wanted to be best buddies with him. So I do think the chemistry is really important, and I think Trudeau is extremely adept at saying nothing charmingly. And I think this will come into play. I think it'll serve him well this time.
Let me throw into the mix what Amnesty International had to say on this, and I'll show you the board. Prime Minister Trudeau cannot equivocate when he sits down for his first face-to-face meet with President Trump. He must make it clear that Canada needs and expects the president to advance human rights protections at home and abroad, not set it back. That's from Beatrice Vaughrant, the Director General of Amnesty International Canada. Rob, what do you think? First or last thing he should do?
Well, it's going to be tough for him in Washington to avoid this question. And I think he knows here at home, look, he's on shaky grounds with progressives on a lot of issues. And this is one that they're really pushing on. So if Trudeau looks as though he's going to roll over and not say anything on the refugee issue or not stand up for the rights of refugees, I mean, it's going to make him look weak in that sense. So I think he's well aware that this is an issue here and it's going to come up. But, I think Susan's right. I don't think either of these two are really looking to to take a stand. I don't think Trump really has a bone to pick with Canada. I don't think he really sees it to his advantage to really push Trudeau on anything. So I think it is about showing that they can get along and that Trump can be liked and respected by other world leaders. I think that's what Trump's looking to get out of it. I think if Justin Trudeau goes out of his way to embarrass the president or anger the president, well, then that turns things on its head.
John, what do you think?
I think Paul Wells at the Toronto Star made a very good point that Donald Trump on the phone can be incredibly belligerent. Donald Trump on the stump can be incredibly belligerent. But on one-on-one meetings, he tends to be a bit of a pussycat. Think of that meeting with the Mexican president during the election campaign, or Abe of Japan recently, and others. So Justin Trudeau doesn't have to do much except, as Susan says, display his incredible Justin Trudeau-esque empathy and charm. That will get him through this meeting, which will have some sort of anodyne agreement on, border pre-clearance or regulatory harmonization or stuff like that. The thing is, down the road, there are far bigger issues coming.
Yeah.
Softwood lumber, supply management, and the big elephant in the room, are the Americans going to incorporate some kind of import tax as part of their budget, and is Canada going to be exempt from that import tax? All of those things are huge issues, but they're huge issues later in the year. Yeah. Right now, I think we may actually be overselling this meeting. It all might be nothing more than sort of smiles and handshakes.
Yeah.
And I think we've already seen Trump in retreat on a number of things. Obviously, the ban being challenged in the court, that's the most obvious one. But as reality sinks in, as the complexity of both global issues and trade issues comes into play, I think there appear to be enough level-headed people around, or at least veterans, I guess, of the trade wars around in the States, which our cabinet ministers have been assiduously courting and meeting with this week. I'm just thinking it may not be all as bad as we're all expecting, notwithstanding Trump's kind of explosive comments from time to time.
Yeah, the anticipation is, and Donald, and what the Prime Minister has tried to do ahead of this meeting is set it up so that they're talking about the things that we have in common. The other issues that have been pushed by the other ministers are the fact that we're the top market for 35 of the states, one of the biggest sources of foreign oil, and #1 buyer of their goods. Don't they have to please us just a little?
No, not really. The thing is, yes, we're an important source of those goods, but there are other sources. And the American economy is essentially self-sufficient. It's a great big economy of more than 300 million people. So while they do trade and while they do import, they can actually rely on their own internal market in a way that Canada cannot. So if there were, for example, some kind of a horrible trade war in which they imposed an import tax on us and we imposed an import tax back in revenge, it would hurt us far, far more than it would hurt them. For them, having a decline in trade with Canada would be an inconvenience. For us, it would be a tragedy.
And if I could just comment the auto sector, which has attracted a lot of attention. Yes, there is a threat. Excuse me, in the sense that if there is a border tariff or something like that, it certainly could hurt. We've talked a lot about how integrated the auto industry is across the 3 countries in North America. To me, the greater threat, and there might be some short-term bumps or interruptions in that trade as a result of the Trump presidency, but the greater threat is the advent of electric vehicles, the whole change, profound technological changes that are coming. This is not just, I'm not just citing environmental sources for this, but Forbes magazine was saying that by 2025, electric vehicles could dominate. Electric vehicles need far fewer moving parts than conventional engines do, and Canada is a major exporter of parts, of conventional auto parts. So to me, the threats are larger than just this particular relationship.
And the manufacturing sector, of course, a big concern for Ontario. Rob, in the West, how does the West view Donald Trump compared to what we see in the East?
Well, and it was interesting. I think it mirrors there was a poll out earlier this week suggesting that a lot of Canadians, or most Canadians, don't like Donald Trump. But if you just take him on issues, you find a lot of agreement on certain issues because, and look here, out in the West, the Keystone XL announcement was big. And you saw right across the political spectrum, even Rachel Notley out here, previously opposed Keystone XL, has come around to it. And it was talking about how great it's going to be for the economy. So on issues like this, there's excitement. But on the other hand, whether you're in Alberta or in Ontario, I mean, the threat of a border tax and protectionist policies would be very damaging. But you look at an issue like security, on the other hand, and I don't think people out here would want to go as far as Donald Trump is going, but I think there's some unease about Justin Trudeau's own policies on refugees and whether we've brought too many in too fast. And certainly what we've been hearing in recent days and weeks about people coming across the border, there are questions about that. So that it gets back to that fine line that Trudeau needs to walk to sort of show that we're different from the Americans, but that he's still prepared to take the issue seriously.
And you mean the issue of security of the nation?
On the security side, yeah,
and
absolutely.
where is the biggest threat in terms of what is the biggest concern that you're seeing from people?
Well, I think it's twofold. I mean, I think that there are security concerns, and I think out here people are a little nervous. And, I do hear from people willing to defend what Trump is doing, although more or less I think that's probably an unpopular approach. Even the conservatives have distanced themselves from what Trump is doing. But on the economic side, the idea of pushing ahead with a Trump-like agenda, I think it does have some appeal here, even if the man himself appears not to.
Susan?
I take Rob's point. I think he's right. I think he's right on one score. I think that the alienation that Trump spoke to, particularly in the Rust Belt in the U.S., is also felt in southwestern Ontario, certainly, and all across the country in different places. That being said, the oil industry, I think, should be heartened by the appointment of Rex Tillerson, the former head of ExxonMobil, as the Secretary of State. ExxonMobil is still a big player in the oil sands in Alberta, although they've been some withdrawing, like everybody, a little bit. Whatever his opinion about climate change is, he is at least extremely knowledgeable about the oil sector and how integrated it all is. And that, I think, should, Rob would know better than I, but I would think that would be reassuring to people in the oil sector.
Yeah, I mean, well, it certainly is. So I think when it comes to energy and the oil sands, off the heels, obviously, of Trudeau's own pipeline approvals, and now it looks like Keystone XL is going to go ahead. I think people certainly in the energy sector, and I know the Alberta government itself is encouraged by this because, as I say, Rachel Notley had previously opposed Keystone XL, but I think she sees that going forward now in the light of her own carbon tax to see some growth and some rebound in the energy sector would work well for her own political fortune. So certainly people are encouraged on that side here.
I'm wondering about the timing of this. We saw this just announced late last week. It was all of a sudden. It was Monday. We know the Prime Minister is heading off to Europe later this week. He's going to address the European Parliament. He's going to talk to the Germans. Is Canada going to go back, John, to its, I remember being at a NATO summit in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech Republic, newly Czech Republic a number of years ago, and the head of NATO at the time saying to me, Canada's role is to interpret America to Europe. If ever they needed an interpreter, it's now. Do you think, what do you make of the timing of having this meeting with Donald Trump right now in between, just before he heads off to Europe?
Well, they had to meet sooner or later, and sooner is better than later, because the longer the delay, the more it would raise questions and panels like this about what's going wrong in the Canada-U.S. relationship that Donald Trump isn't meeting with Justin Trudeau. So they wanted to get the meeting in, if only for the anodyne reasons of, meeting and greeting and doing handshakes in the Oval Office and stuff like that. The Canadians wanted some kind of deliverable. Some kind of proof that the meeting was productive. And I think we will probably see there's a program called Beyond the Border that Stephen Harper signed with Barack Obama that aimed to make it easier to cross the border, to get pre-clearance at American customs on the Canadian side of the border, and regulatory harmonization so that all the seatbelt regulations were the same on both sides of the border, stuff like that. Since that thing was signed, it's been crawling along bit by bit, incrementally, with the Canadians, by the way, paying for a good chunk of the American infrastructure. So you're probably going to see something on that. It may not mean anything, but they'll commit to it and promise each other that they'll work hard on trying to make Beyond the Border work. The other interesting thing, though, is usually this meeting ends with the Canadian Prime Minister inviting the American President to visit Canada at his earliest opportunity, and the American President accepting. What I want to know is, will Justin Trudeau extend that invitation, and will Donald Trump accept it? Because I don't want to think what would happen if Donald Trump were to set foot on this side of the border.
Maybe they'll schedule it for August 15th or something, when everybody's out of town.
Christmas.
Well, listen, I want to talk more about that, but listen, how do you think our Prime Minister should conduct himself with Donald Trump at the White House tomorrow? Tweet me at Carol McNeil.